In a Nanjing supermarket in 2016, a mother was caught stealing a chicken drumstick and a children's book for her 8-year-old daughter who was dying in a hospital bed. The police let her go. Every day, poverty forces impossible choices, and someone becomes a thief to save a life. But what happens when that thief is just a child, and the person who catches them sees not a crime, but a cry for help? This story isn't unique to China. It's a desperate calculus playing out in rural towns and forgotten corners everywhere where poverty and a sick family member collide. When a child becomes the one to make that desperate choice, to cross a line to save someone they love, what happens next defines more than a moment. It tests the very idea of justice. And sometimes the response isn't a handcuff, it's a saddle. To understand that kind of theft, you have to understand the landscape that creates it. Picture a high desert valley in eastern Oregon, a place where the nearest town with a proper clinic is a 45-mile drive over a washboard gravel road. Here, you find the Miller place. Not a ranch, really. Just a weathered single-wide trailer and a leaning barn on 10 parched acres. This is where 7-year-old Leo lived with his grandmother, Edna. Edna Miller was 68, a former school bus driver whose pension didn't stretch to cover the new inhalers her COPD demanded. The monthly copay was $47. After groceries, the utility bill that kept her oxygen machine running, and the payment on the 20-year-old pickup truck, there was rarely $47 left. Some months, she'd skip a dose, stretching one inhaler to last 6 weeks instead of 4. Leo watched her do it. He saw the way her shoulders would hunch, the way she'd pause in the middle of making toast to catch a breath that wouldn't come. The system on paper was supposed to catch them. Edna was on Medicaid, but in their county, only one pharmacy in that distant town accepted it, and that pharmacy often didn't have her specific medication in stock. The alternative was a brand-name version at a chain pharmacy with a copay of $120. This is the brutal arithmetic of rural medicine poverty. The safety net has holes wide enough for a child to fall through. Leo's world was small, defined by the dust of their yard, the static of the old TV, and the sound of his grandmother's labored breathing. His parents were a faded photo on the sideboard, lost to a car accident on that same gravel road when he was 3. Edna was all he had, and in the mind of a 7-year-old, a problem you can see has a solution you can find. He didn't understand insurance formularies or copay tiers. He understood his grandma couldn't breathe, and the little metal canister made it better. And the canister was empty. 20 miles from the Miller trailer was the working ranch owned by Sam Coulter. Sam was in his late 40s, a man of few words and calloused hands, running a few hundred head of cattle. The ranch supply store he frequented in the tiny crossroads hamlet of Pine Creek had a small veterinary section, and on a high shelf in that section, behind the counter, were boxes of aminophylline tablets, a bronchodilator used for horses with heaves. It wasn't the same as Edna's prescription, not even close. But to Leo, who had overheard the vet mention it once when treating a cow, it was medicine that helped something breathe. This is where desperation rewrites logic. A child's plan isn't a plan, it's a direct line from problem to action. One hot afternoon in late July, with Edna asleep in her chair, her breathing a thin whistle, Leo took his backpack. He walked the 2 miles to the main road, then stuck out his thumb. A long-haul trucker, assuming the boy was headed to the nearby creek to swim, dropped him a mile from the Pine Creek store. The store was quiet, just the clerk, me, reading a magazine behind the register. Leo knew the layout. He'd been there with Edna before she got too sick for the trip. He lingered by the tack, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. When me stepped into the back room to answer the phone, he moved. It wasn't graceful. He scrambled onto the lower shelf behind the counter, his small fingers reaching, knocking over a bottle of hoof oil in his panic. He grabbed the first green and white box his hand touched, shoved it into his backpack, and bolted for the door. He didn't make it. Sam Coulter was coming in as Leo was rushing out. The boy slammed right into Sam's legs, stumbled back, and the backpack fell, spitting out its contents, a single box of aminophylline tablets. Leo froze, tears of terror and failure already streaking through the dust on his face. Me came out from the back, her mouth a tight line. Sam, that little thief just took from behind the counter. The scene was set for the predictable hard lesson. A scared child, a stolen good, an authority figure. Sam Coulter looked down at the box of horse pills. He looked at the boy's torn shirt, his too thin arms, the absolute despair in his eyes. He didn't see a criminal, he saw a symptom. "Look at me, son," Sam said, his voice low, not unkind. "Why?" Leo couldn't speak. He just shook his head, sobs shaking his small frame. Me folded her arms. "I'm calling the sheriff, Sam. This ain't the first time stuff gone missing." Sam held up a hand, quieting her. He knelt down, putting himself at eye level with Leo. He didn't ask again, he waited. And the words finally broke out of Leo, a desperate, hiccuping confession. "It's for my grandma. She can't breathe no more. The medicine's all gone and she sounds like she's drowning inside." He pointed a trembling finger at the box. "The vet said for breathing." Sam closed his eyes for a second. He knew Edna Miller, knew she lived out past the old quarry, knew she'd been sick. The pieces clicked into a terrible, clear picture. He stood up slowly. He looked at me, put it on my tab. Then he looked back at Leo. "Where is she right now?" "Home," Leo whispered, "sleeping." Sam Coulter didn't hand him over to the sheriff. He didn't deliver a lecture. He turned and walked out of the store, leaving a confused me and a stunned little boy standing there. Leo watched through the window, unsure what was happening, expecting a police car to arrive any second. Instead, he saw Sam stride across the dusty parking lot to where his big dapple gray gelding was tied to the rail. And without a word, Sam Coulter began to saddle his horse. He didn't take the road. Sam Coulter swung up into the saddle and pointed his horse, Jasper, straight across the scrubland, cutting a diagonal line toward the Miller place. The boy, Leo, was left standing in the dust, the stolen box still at his feet, unsure if he was supposed to follow or run. Inside the store, Me had already picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the numbers. She watched the rancher ride away, then looked at the crying child. With a sigh, she put the receiver down. The sheriff could wait. Sam pushed Jasper hard. The image of the boy's face, pure, undiluted terror, wouldn't leave him. It was a look he'd seen in animals cornered by predators, not in children. When the trailer came into view, the air felt wrong, too still. No TV light flickered in the window. He dismounted before Jasper had fully stopped, his boots hitting the hardpan with a thud. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The smell hit him first. Stale air, medicine, and beneath it, the sour scent of sickness. Edna Miller was in her recliner, her head lolled to one side. Her lips had a faint bluish tinge. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid hitches. On the table beside her sat an empty inhaler and a pile of overdue medical bills. Sam didn't need to be a doctor to know this was beyond a skipped dose. This was a woman in respiratory distress, sliding toward failure. He acted on a rancher's triage instinct. He found the portable oxygen tank, checked the gauge, it was nearly empty. He found the backup, also empty. The system had failed her long before her grandson walked into that store. Sam grabbed the home phone, a old corded model, no dial tone. The bill hadn't been paid. He pulled out his own cell phone, 1 bar of service. He called the only number that made sense. The county's single ambulance service, based 40 minutes away in the town of Grants Pass. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "What's the nature of the emergency?" Woman in her 60s, severe COPD, cyanotic, struggling to breathe. Portable oxygen is out. She needs transport now. A pause, the sound of keyboard clicks. "What's the address?" Sam gave the rural route number. Another longer pause. "Sir, I'm showing that address is outside our primary service zone for immediate advanced life support. The estimated response time is 50 to 70 minutes. We can dispatch, but I have to advise you, if it's critical, you may want to attempt to bring her in yourself." The bureaucratic reality landed like a physical blow. Zone boundaries, response times. A human being was turning blue, and the system's first response was a geography lesson. This was the institutional wall that Edna and Leo had been crashing against for months. "Dispatch the ambulance," Sam said, his voice tight. "I'm moving her." He found a wool blanket and wrapped it around Edna. She was barely conscious, a murmur of protest on her lips. "Leo," she whispered. "Leo's fine," Sam said, lifting her as gently as he could. She was shockingly light. "We're getting you help." Carrying her out, he managed to get her into the passenger seat of his old ranch truck, propping her up with the blanket. He left Jasper tied to the porch rail with a trough of water. As he turned the truck onto the main gravel road, driving faster than was safe, his mind raced. This wasn't just bad luck. This was a pattern: the empty oxygen tanks, the disconnected phone, the pills she couldn't afford. This was what happened when poverty met a chronic illness at the end of a long dirt road. The child stealing horse medicine wasn't the cause of the crisis. He was the last, desperate symptom of it. He met the ambulance 20 miles out at the junction where the paved county road began. The transfer was swift, the paramedics professional. As they loaded Edna in, one of them, a woman with tired eyes, shook her head. "We get a call from this area, it's always the same story. No transport, no supplies, waited until it was an emergency." She looked at Sam. "You family?" "Neighbor," Sam said. "She's lucky you were there today. Another few hours." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Sam followed the ambulance to the small regional hospital in Grants Pass. In the waiting room under the fluorescent lights, the full weight of the situation settled. A social worker eventually found him. Edna was stabilized, but she'd be admitted. There were questions. Who was he? Where was the next of kin? That's when Sam remembered the boy. Leo was still back at the store, or maybe he'd walked home to an empty trailer. Sam drove back, a knot of dread in his stomach. The sun was dipping low when he pulled into the Pine Creek store parking lot. Mee was outside, smoking a cigarette. She pointed a thumb toward the back of the store. Kid, in the storage room, didn't have the heart to make him leave. He's scared silent. Leo was sitting on an upturned milk crate, knees to his chest. He looked up when Sam entered, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of fear. Sam crouched down. "Your grandma's at the hospital. She's getting help." The boy's composure shattered. He buried his face in his arms, his small body racked with silent sobs of relief and delayed terror. Sam put a hand on his bony shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me. You hear? You did good." But the immediate crisis was just the door into a much larger room. The next morning, Sam went to the hospital to check on Edna. He found her awake, frail, but breathing easier with proper oxygen. And he found the hospital billing advocate sitting at her bedside, a clipboard in hand. The woman was polite, but the message was steel. Edna's Medicaid would cover the emergency admission, but not the new, more effective inhaler regimen the doctor was recommending. It wouldn't cover a home health aide to check on her. It wouldn't cover the medical-grade oxygen concentrator she desperately needed to replace the tanks. The estimated gap, the amount Edna would owe just for the basics to stay out of the hospital, was over $300 a month. An impossible sum. The advocate's solution was a stack of charity application forms, each one 8 pages long, requiring tax documents Edna couldn't find and income verification from a pension she couldn't access online. Sam left the hospital with a cold fury building in him. He drove to the county social services office. He waited for an hour to speak to a caseworker. When he explained the situation, the theft, the medical crisis, the financial black hole, the woman behind the desk listened with a practiced, weary sympathy. "Mr. Coulter, I wish I had a magic wand. The Miller case is familiar to us. She's on the maximum benefits for her category. The cost of living adjustment hasn't kept pace with medical inflation, especially out here. We refer her to charitable foundations, but the waiting lists are months long." "So what's the solution?" Sam asked. "She dies at home because she can't afford to breathe." The caseworker spread her hands. "The solution is policy change, more funding. expanded Medicaid waivers for in-home care. I don't have that here. All I have are forms. She was not the villain. She was another cog in the same overwhelmed, under-resourced machine. This was the major pivot. The problem wasn't a single sick woman or a single desperate boy. It was a structural flaw. Rural areas like his had 20% fewer healthcare providers per capita than urban areas. Children in these communities were 25% more likely to live in poverty. Distance wasn't just geography. It was a death sentence by spreadsheet. Sam's next stop was the sheriff's office. He walked in, expecting maybe to smooth things over for Leo. Instead, he found me had already filed a formal report. The deputy on duty, a young man named Higgins, had the incident report on his desk. "Sam," Higgins said, "this is a mess. Theft is theft. The store owner wants to press charges. The thief is a 7-year-old trying to save his grandmother's life," Sam said, his voice low. "You really want to process a second grader for that?" Higgins shifted uncomfortably. "The law's the law, and between you and me, the district attorney's office has been pushing a zero-tolerance thing on petty theft lately. Make stats look good." He lowered his voice. "It's not my call, Sam. The report gets forwarded. Given the value, it'll likely be handled as a juvenile misdemeanor. Could mean probation, mandatory counseling. The family would get a court-appointed advocate." Sam stared at him. The system, having failed to prevent the crime through basic human support, was now poised to punish the child for its own failure. This was the escalation of stakes, from a medical crisis to a legal one. Leo wasn't just facing his grandmother's illness. He was facing the cold machinery of juvenile justice. Sam drove back to his ranch, but he couldn't settle. That night he made another call, this time to an old friend who was now a reporter for the regional newspaper in Bend. He told the story, leaving out names for the moment. The reporter listened, then whistled softly. "That's the whole rural healthcare crisis in one anecdote, Sam. The desperate choices it forces. The kids who end up holding the bag. You willing to go on the record?" Sam looked out his window at the dark expanse of his land. Going on record meant stepping into a spotlight he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. It meant potentially tangling with local officials, the sheriff, the DA. It meant his quiet life was over. But he thought of Leo's face, of Edna's blue-tinged lips, of the social worker's empty hands. "Yeah," Sam said, "I'm willing." The article ran 3 days later. The headline was blunt: "To save a grandmother, a boy steals. To save the boy, a rancher must fight the system." It named no names initially, but the details were specific enough that everyone in Pine Creek and Grants Pass knew exactly who it was about. The reaction was instantaneous and split violently down the middle. Some called Sam a hero. Donations, small and large, began to trickle into a fund set up at the local bank for Edna's medical expenses. A retired nurse from a town 60 miles away volunteered to drive out twice a week to check on her. The community's heart, it seemed, was far more responsive than its bureaucracy. But the other reaction was colder. The owner of the Pine Creek store, a man named Rick who lived in the city and saw the store as a business asset, was furious. He felt the article made his business look negligent and unsafe. He threatened a defamation lawsuit against the newspaper. More pressingly, he pressured the sheriff to follow through on the theft charge to protect the principle of property rights. Then Sam received a certified letter. It was from the County Department of Human Services. It stated that following public disclosure of a minor's involvement in criminal activity and the attendant familial instability, a review of Leo's living situation had been initiated. Given Edna's incapacitation and the lack of a suitable alternative guardian in the home, the letter strongly suggested that Leo might be placed into temporary foster care for his own safety and well-being, until Edna's situation was stabilized. Sam read the letter twice, his blood turning to ice. They were going to take the boy. The very system that had failed to provide a breathing machine was now poised to remove a child from the only home he'd ever known, citing the instability its own failures had created. This was the high-tension bridge. The personal fight had just exploded into a public, bureaucratic war. Sam Coulter had saddled his horse to save a woman. Now, he would have to learn how to fight a much larger beast to save her grandson. And he had 1 week before the custody hearing. Sam didn't know the first thing about family court, but he knew when a line had been crossed. Taking a child from a sick grandmother wasn't protection, it was punishment. He drove straight back to the hospital, the letter crumpled in his fist. He found Edna awake and with Leo sitting quietly in a chair by the window, drawing on scrap paper with hospital pens. The boy looked up, and the fear in his eyes had changed. It was no longer the sharp fear of getting caught. It was the dull, heavy fear of being taken. Sam showed Edna the letter. Her hands trembled as she read it. The color drained from her face, which had only just begun to regain a little pink. "They can't," she whispered, her voice a rasp. "He's my boy, he's all I have." "They're gonna try," Sam said quietly. "But they're not the only ones who can make a call." His first move was to the bank. He withdrew $2,000, a significant chunk of his emergency savings. Then he drove to the nearest city, Bend, and walked into the office of the only family law attorney whose name he'd gotten from the reporter. Alicia Chen was in her 40s, sharp, and specialized in cases against the county. She listened to Sam's story, her expression neutral until he mentioned the timing, the letter arriving days after the newspaper article. She leaned back in her chair. "Retaliation," she said flatly, "or in legal terms, an adverse action following protected speech. It's a nasty look for them, but to stop it, we need to prove the home is safe. Is it?" Sam was honest. No, not with her sick and broke, but it could be with help. Alicia agreed to take the case, but her retainer was $3,000. Sam wrote the check, the numbers feeling surreal. He was spending a season's hay profit to fight a government agency over a boy who wasn't his. As he left, Alicia gave him a list. "You have 6 days. I need affidavits from anyone who can attest to Edna's character as a caregiver before she got sick. I need a doctor's statement on her current prognosis and home care needs. And most importantly, I need a certified home evaluation from a licensed social worker not employed by the county, stating the home can be made safe. Find one who will do it pro bono. Good luck." The task was Herculean, but the article had done something. Sam's phone began to ring. The retired nurse, Marcy, offered not just medical help but to be a character witness. A local church group volunteered to repair the Miller's porch steps and install safety rails. The donations at the bank fund crept toward $1,500. The community was mobilizing, a grassroots safety net forming in real time. But for every action, there was a reaction. The store owner, Rick, gave a quote to another newspaper, framing Sam as a vigilante who encouraged theft. "What message does it send?" Rick said. "If we excuse crime because of a hard luck story, my business suffers losses, that hurts everyone." The district attorney's office, sensing political heat, made a statement. "The juvenile matter is proceeding independently. The child's welfare is our only concern." It was a careful, neutralizing script. Then came the "wait, it gets worse" moment. 3 days before the hearing, Sam was at the Miller trailer with Marcy the nurse, assessing what Edna would need to come home. Leo was outside, kicking a ball against the barn. A county sedan pulled up. It wasn't the social worker they'd met before. It was a man in a suit, accompanied by Deputy Higgins. The man introduced himself as Gary Vall from the county attorney's office. "Mr. Coulter," Vall said, his tone cordial but cool. "We're here for a pre-hearing site visit, standard procedure." He proceeded to walk through the trailer, taking notes on a tablet, the aging electrical outlets, the single bathroom without grab bars, the distance from the nearest neighbor, the lack of a landline. Each observation was a tick in a box labeled unsuitable. Sam followed, his anger simmering. "These things can be fixed. People are lined up to help fix them." Vall gave a thin smile. "Potential future remediation is not the same as a currently safe environment. The standard is the child's safety today." Then he dropped the bombshell. We've also become aware of the pending juvenile theft charge. Our office is considering filing a concurrent dependency petition, citing moral unfitness of the guardian for failing to prevent the criminal behavior. Sam felt the ground shift. They weren't just saying the home was physically unsafe. They were arguing that Edna, by virtue of being poor and sick, was morally unfit for letting her grandson become so desperate he stole. They were criminalizing poverty itself. This was the institutional countermove, a legal escalation designed to overwhelm. That night Sam hit a wall. The pro bono social worker Alicia found had backed out, citing pressure from the county. The doctor was hesitant to make a firm prognosis. The clock was ticking. In a moment of frustration, he called Alicia. "What's the play if we lose?" "If the judge grants temporary custody to the state, Leo goes into foster care tonight. We appeal, but that takes months. The goal then shifts to reunification, which requires Edna to meet every single county benchmark, which she likely never will. It becomes a permanent separation." Sam sat in the dark of his kitchen. He had thrown money and effort at a system designed to absorb both and maintain its course. He needed a different weapon. He needed leverage. He remembered something Deputy Higgins had let slip during Val's visit. Higgins had muttered about the DA wanting the theft case to be clean and by the book because of the newspaper attention. Sam got out his laptop, a device he mostly used for cattle auction listings. He started searching. He looked up the store's business license. He looked up county contract databases. It was slow, frustrating work. Then, around 2 in the morning, he found it. The Pine Creek General Store, owned by Rick's LLC, held an annual exclusive contract with Harney County to supply roadside maintenance crews with fuel and sundries. A $70,000 contract. And the county supervisor who signed off on the contract's most recent renewal was named Gary Val. Sam stared at the screen. It was a connection, not necessarily corruption, but a clear conflict of interest. Val, the county attorney arguing for Leo's removal, was professionally entwined with Rick, the store owner pushing for Leo's prosecution. It was the kind of small-town entanglement that made impartial oversight a joke. He called Alicia at 6 a.m. "Can we use this?" Her voice was alert, intrigued. "It's not a smoking gun, but it's a context bomb. It gives the judge a reason to question the county's entire narrative. It suggests the welfare concern might be intertwined with a desire to placate a county vendor. We introduce it, and the hearing isn't just about a poor old woman anymore. It's about the integrity of the process." The day before the hearing, Sam did 2 things. He met with the reporter again and gave him the contract information off the record for now. And he went to see Edna and Leo at the hospital. He knelt in front of Leo. "Listen to me. However tomorrow goes, you did nothing wrong. You tried to help your family. Never be ashamed of that." Leo just nodded, his small jaw set in a way that reminded Sam of a man, not a boy. The morning of the hearing arrived. The county courtroom was small, wood-paneled, intimidating. Edna was there in a wheelchair, Marcy by her side. Leo sat between Sam and Alicia Chen, wearing a stiff new shirt. Across the aisle sat Gary Val and a county social worker. In the back, Deputy Higgins and Rick the store owner watched. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Whitaker, called the session to order. Val presented the county's case with smooth efficiency. The medical crisis, the unsafe home, the criminal act of the child, the grandmother's inability to provide or supervise. He painted a picture of utter, inescapable neglect. When he finished, it sounded like a foregone conclusion. Then Alicia Chen stood. She didn't start with the home. She started with the theft. She called Sam to the stand. Under her questioning, Sam recounted finding Leo, the empty inhaler, the empty oxygen tanks, the ambulance dispatcher's zone warning, the social worker's empty hands. He wasn't arguing. He was testifying to a sequence of systemic failure. Then Alicia entered into evidence the bank records showing the community fund, the signed pledges from Marcy and the church group, the doctor's newly acquired statement that, with support, Edna could return home. The judge listened, her face unreadable. Then Alicia shifted. "Your Honor, we must also examine the context of the county's sudden, urgent concern for this child's welfare, which manifested only after public scrutiny." She entered the county contract document into evidence. The county attorney arguing for removal, Mr. Vall, oversees the contractual relationship with the very business pressing charges against the child. This creates, at minimum, an appearance of impropriety. It begs the question, is this about the child's welfare or about managing public relations and protecting a vendor relationship? The room went perfectly still, Vall's face flushed. "Objection, Your Honor, speculation." "Withdrawn," Alicia said smoothly, having already planted the seed. "The point is, the county's judgment in this matter is not pristine. Given that, we ask the court to consider a solution that actually protects Leo Miller, keeping him with his family and ordering the county to provide the support it failed to provide in the first place." It was a breathtaking pivot. She wasn't just asking to block foster care. She was asking the judge to force the county to solve the problem it had created. Vall was on his feet, objecting, arguing the county had no such obligation. Judge Whitaker raised a hand, silencing the room. She looked at Leo, who was staring straight ahead, holding Edna's hand. She looked at the paperwork in front of her for a long, silent minute. Then she spoke. "The court is suspending the temporary custody order for 72 hours. She looked at Vall, then at Alicia. "I want both parties back in this courtroom in 3 days. I want a jointly drafted plan, a real, funded, actionable plan for how this child remains safely in his home with his grandmother. If I do not have a plan I can approve, I will make a ruling neither side will like." Court adjourned. It was a temporary stay, not a victory, but it was a chance. As they walked out, Vall shot Sam a look of pure fury. The battle wasn't over. It had just changed venues. Now, Sam and the county attorney who wanted to dismantle Leo's life had 72 hours to build a new one together. The system had been forced to the table. The real negotiation was about to begin. The 72-hour deadline turned the county offices into a war room, but the sides were no longer clear. Judge Whitaker had forced an impossible collaboration. Sam, Alicia Chen, Gary Vall, and a suddenly involved senior official from the Department of Human Services sat around a conference table. The air was thick with resentment and legal caution. Alicia opened with a bold demand. The county drops the juvenile theft petition against Leo and covers the cost of making the Miller home safe, the oxygen concentrator, safety modifications, and 6 months of visiting nurse checks through Marcy. In exchange, Sam would drop any notion of pursuing a conflict of interest complaint regarding Vall and the store contract. Vall bristled. "That's extortion, and the theft charge is a separate legal matter." "It's all the same matter," Alicia countered calmly. "The charge is the catalyst for the removal petition. Remove the catalyst, and the primary justification for claiming the home is morally unfit evaporates. We're here to build a solution, not win a case." "Which is it?" The DHS official, a weary-looking man named Peterson, saw the writing on the wall. A protracted public fight over a sympathetic child was a political nightmare. A quiet, solved problem was a win. He overruled Vall. "We can explore a diversion program for the juvenile. No formal charge if conditions are met. As for the home modifications, our budget is for removal and foster care, not home preservation." Sam, who had been silent, spoke up. "The community fund has over $2,000 for the equipment. Volunteer labor for the modifications is lined up. You don't need to pay for it. You just need to not stand in the way and sign off that it meets your standards." This was the pragmatic core of the deal. The county wouldn't spend new money. It would simply redirect existing resources, approving the community's plan as an alternative to foster care. It was a face-saving exit for everyone. After 6 hours of tense negotiation, they had a framework. The juvenile matter would be diverted. Leo would be required to complete 10 hours of community service at the local food bank, and Sam would be appointed his informal mentor. The theft charge would disappear upon completion. The home plan was more detailed. A licensed contractor, volunteering his time, would install grab bars, smoke detectors, and repair the porch. The community fund would purchase the oxygen concentrator. Marcy the nurse would visit twice weekly, with her hours covered by a patchwork of donations and a small county stipend from an existing respite care program. Edna would be enrolled in a Medicaid waiver program for in-home support, a process Peterson promised to expedite. They presented the joint plan to Judge Whitaker 71 hours later. She read it in silence, her glasses perched on her nose. She looked at Vol. The county agrees this plan serves the child's best interest. Yes, Your Honor, Vol said, the words clearly tasting bitter. She looked at Alicia. The family agrees. They do, Your Honor. Finally, she looked at Leo, who sat perfectly still between Edna and Sam. Young man, do you understand what community service means? Leo nodded, eyes wide. It means helping other people, he whispered. Judge Whitaker almost smiled. It does. I am approving this plan. I am retaining jurisdiction for 6 months to ensure compliance. Court adjourned. It was over. Not with a bang, but with a stack of paperwork and a handshake nobody felt like giving. The immediate legal threat to Leo was gone, but the real work was just beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. The contractor and his crew descended on the Miller trailer. Sam was there every day, coordinating, hauling materials, making coffee. Leo, when not in school, followed him like a shadow, handing him tools, asking questions. The community that had been abstractly supportive now became physically present. Casseroles appeared on the step. An anonymous donor paid the Millers' overdue electric bill. Edna came home from the hospital weak but determined. The new oxygen concentrator hummed quietly in the corner, a constant, reliable presence. Marcy came, checked her vitals, and showed Leo how to read the machine's gauges, making him a partner in his grandmother's care. The fear in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a watchful, practical seriousness. Sam kept his promise about the community service. Every Saturday for 2 months, he drove Leo to the food bank in Grants Pass. At first, Leo sorted cans in silence, but slowly he began to talk to the other volunteers. He saw people come in who looked like his grandmother, tired, worn thin by life. He was no longer just a recipient of help, he was part of giving it. The experience reframed his own desperate act from one of shame to one of understood context. The newspaper ran a follow-up story, The Repair. It highlighted the community effort and the unusual collaboration. It did not declare a winner. It simply stated that a child was home, a grandmother was breathing easier, and a system had, under duress, found a flexible solution. Reader responses were overwhelmingly positive, but a few echoed Rick the store owner's original stance. What about the next kid who steals? This question hung in the air, pointing to the unresolved systemic issue. The Miller case was fixed, but the conditions that created it remained. This is where the story takes its final, surprising turn. Gary Vol, the county attorney who had argued to take Leo away, requested a meeting with Sam. Not in his office, but at a diner halfway between Pine Creek and the county seat. Sam went, wary. Vol was already there, a cup of cooling coffee in front of him. He didn't mince words. I think you were right, he said. Not about me and the contract, that's business, but about the problem, we treat the symptoms. The kid acts out, we punish. The home is unsafe, we remove. We don't have a mechanism to fix asterisk, only to process. Sam was stunned into silence. Vol continued, Peterson from DHS and I have been talking. The waiver we used for Edna's in-home care, the diversion program for Leo, they're small, underfunded programs. But they worked here because there was outside pressure and community capital. What if we made that the first step, not the last resort? What Vol was proposing was a pilot program, a family preservation partnership. When a case like the Millers came in, involving medical poverty and a child at risk, instead of automatic removal proceedings, a county coordinator would work with nonprofits, faith groups, and volunteers to build a support plan first asterisk. The legal tools would be a last resort, not a first response. It would be cheaper than foster care and more humane. We need a community advisory board to help run it, Val said, looking directly at Sam. People who know the land, the people, the real problems. People who aren't from the county building. Sam took a long drink of his own coffee. You asking me to sit on a board with you? I'm asking if you want to build something that might stop the next kid from having to steal horse pills, Val said. It wasn't an apology. It was a proposal. Sam said he'd think about it. He did for about a week. He thought about the countless other trailers on countless other back roads. He thought about the next desperate grandchild. He said yes. The pilot program launched 6 months later with a tiny seed grant from the county and a lot of volunteered time. Sam Coulter, rancher, found himself in monthly meetings with social workers, nurses, and yes, Gary Vall. It was awkward. It was slow, but it was a start. A year after Leo took that box from the shelf, the rhythms of a new normal had settled. Edna's health was stable, managed by regular care. Leo was in 3rd grade, a quiet kid who had started to smile more. The juvenile record was sealed, the community service complete. Sam still came bi-weekly, often with a bag of groceries or just to check the generator. He was no longer just the neighbor. He was family. One afternoon, Sam was fixing a hinge on the miller's repaired porch. Leo was handing him screws. Out of nowhere, the boy asked, "Mr. Coulter, why did you help us? You didn't have to." Sam stopped, the screwdriver in his hand. He thought of all the reasons: anger at a broken system, pity, a rancher's instinct to protect the vulnerable. But the truest reason was the simplest. He looked at Leo. Because you asked for help in the only way you knew how, and sometimes that's enough. He didn't mention the board meetings, the policy drafts, the small, boring work of trying to change a system. That was for the future. For now, the proof was right here. A grandmother on her porch, breathing the clear air, and a grandson beside her, no longer afraid. The story that began with a theft didn't end with a pardon. It ended with a repair of a home, of a family, and of a small, frayed corner of the community's conscience. It proved that justice could look like building a ramp instead of slamming a cell door. That sometimes the most powerful response to a cry for help isn't found in a law book, but in a saddlebag, a toolbox, and the stubborn will to fix what's broken. The story of Leo, Edna, and Sam Coulter asks us a difficult question about the nature of justice itself. Is justice merely the application of rules, or is it the pursuit of what is right? When a child breaks a law to fulfill a basic human duty, to care for a loved one, the response defines us all. We can choose the path of pure punishment, which solves nothing and often perpetuates the cycle of desperation. Or we can choose the harder, messier path of discernment and repair. This isn't about excusing crime. It's about recognizing its source. The data is clear. Poverty is the single greatest predictor of neglect. When a family must choose between medicine and food, between the electric bill and the oxygen machine, the structure around them has already failed. The child who acts out in that vacuum isn't the primary failure. They are the signal. Punishing the signal ignores the siren. Sam Coulter's choice on that dusty afternoon, to saddle his horse instead of calling the sheriff, was an act of moral triage. He addressed the bleeding wound first, but his real impact came later, in the stubborn, unglamorous work of navigating bureaucracy, spending his own savings, and sitting through endless meetings to build a better catchnet. He moved from mercy to mechanics. That is where true change lives, in the grueling shift from compassion as a feeling to compassion as a policy. The pilot program born from this crisis is a small experiment. Its success is not guaranteed, but it represents a crucial pivot, from a system designed to process human beings to one attempting to preserve human families. It acknowledges that the cheapest, most humane solution is often to support a home before it collapses, not to sweep up the pieces after. So what is the lesson here for the rest of us? It's that between the black and white of law lies the vast, complicated landscape of human need. The next time you hear a story of a desperate act, Before you judge the action, ask about the context. Look for the empty oxygen tank behind the theft. See the child not as a criminal, but as a canary in a coal mine, signaling a systemic poison. We are all presented with moments, large and small, to be the rule or the remedy, to be the wall or the bridge. Sam Coulter saw a thief and saw a grandson. He saw a crime and saw a cry. And in choosing to answer that cry with action, he didn't just save a family. He outlined a blueprint for a justice that heals. If you believe stories like this matter, stories that challenge simple narratives and explore the difficult space where mercy meets justice, then make sure you're here for the next one. Hit that subscribe button below, because understanding the world isn't about finding easy answers. It's about learning to ask better questions.